Lee Do-yun could not stop looking at the ring. He had been standing in the rain for exactly 4 seconds, long enough for the woman and the small girl to nearly collide with him at the entrance of his building, long enough for the light above the door to catch the gold band on her finger. And in those 4 seconds, 7 years of carefully constructed composure cracked straight down the middle. His heart was doing something it had no business doing. The ring was custom-made. He had designed it himself, sitting across from a jeweler in Insadong for 3 hours, arguing about the exact weight of the band and the precise angle of the inlay. There was not another ring like it anywhere in the world. He knew this because he had paid an extraordinary amount of money to ensure exactly that. He had buried that ring 7 years ago, or rather, he had been told it was buried. He had never actually seen the body. The woman looked up. Her face hit him like a physical thing. The sharp angles, the deep brown skin catching the light, the mouth he had spent years trying to forget. She was older, tired in a way that lived behind the eyes rather than on the skin, but it was her face. It was absolutely her face. She blinked at him. Nothing. No flicker of recognition. No sharp inhale. Just the polite, slightly apologetic expression of a stranger who had nearly walked into someone. "Sorry," she said quietly, stepping aside, pulling the small girl close. He couldn't speak. They walked past him and through the lobby door, and he stood in the rain and did not move for a long time. If you've ever had your entire understanding of reality pulled out from under you in under 5 seconds, then you already know what Lee Do-yun felt standing on that pavement. If you haven't, stay with this story, because this is only the beginning, and it gets so much more complicated. Like this video and subscribe before we go further, because you will want to be here for what comes next. He didn't sleep that night. He sat at his desk with a glass of whiskey he never touched and stared at the wall and ran through every logical explanation he could construct. A look-alike, a coincidence, grief playing tricks on an exhausted mind. These things happened. He was a rational man. He had built a company worth hundreds of billions of won on the back of rational thinking, and rational thinking was telling him to go to bed. But rational thinking had never explained the ring. By 6 in the morning, he had already called Park Jinseo. Jinseo was not the kind of man you called for ordinary problems. He was quiet, meticulous, and expensive, and he had a talent for finding things that were specifically meant to not be found. Do-yun had used him twice in 10 years, once for a corporate leak, once for something he never spoke about. Jinseo never asked unnecessary questions. "A woman," Do-yun said, without greeting. "She came into my building last night with a child. I need everything. Who she is, where she came from, how long she's been in Seoul, and I need to know about a ring." "Send me what you have," Jinseo said. "I have a description." "Then send me that." Do-yun described her. Every detail he had absorbed in those 4 seconds. Her height, the child's age, the ring, the exact style of the ring. He described the child's face, too, because something about the child had snagged in his mind in a way he hadn't fully examined yet. The girl's eyes. Something about her eyes. He pushed that thought away. Jinseo called back in 4 hours. "She's in Unit 3B, has been for 6 weeks. Building management listed her as Mia Adaiz. She moved from Acre. The child is 8 years old, registered as Sophia Adaiz." A pause. "Do-yun. I ran her name against public records." "And?" "Mia Adaiz Lee died 7 years ago. I'm looking at the death certificate right now. Signed, stamped, filed with the district office." Another pause, heavier, this time. "So either your building has a ghost in Unit 3B, or someone went to extraordinary lengths to make the world believe she was dead." Do-yun's hand tightened on the phone. "Keep digging," he said. He saw her again 2 days later. He had not planned it, or at least that was what he told himself. He happened to be in the lobby at 7:45 in the morning, which was not his usual time, wearing a coat he didn't need because the weather had cleared, and she came out of the elevator with Sophie and nearly walked into him again. This time he was ready. "Good morning," he said. She looked up. Same blank politeness. "Good morning." Sophie, however, looked at him with the focused intensity of a child who missed nothing and forgot nothing. "You're the man from the rain," she said. "I am," he said. "We live here now," Sophie announced. "Mama says Seoul takes getting used to. I think it's fine. The street food is very good." She said this with the authority of someone who had conducted extensive research. Mia put a hand on her daughter's shoulder, the automatic gesture of a mother reining in a runaway. Sophie. She glanced at Do-Yun with the measured wariness of a woman who had learned to be careful with strangers. She talks to everyone. She seems bright, he said. She's a handful, Mia said, but the way she said it was soft and fond, and for just a moment, the weariness lifted from her face and something else showed through, something warm and quietly fierce. And Do-Yun's chest did the cracking thing again. They said polite goodbyes, and she walked out with Sophie chattering beside her, and Do-Yun stood in the lobby and looked at nothing and thought about a girl he had loved in another life, who used to say exactly that. She's a handful, about everything she adored. His phone buzzed. Jinseo, check your email. You need to see the hospital records I just pulled. And Do-Yun, the child's birth was registered 6 weeks after Mia supposedly died. Someone registered a dead woman's baby. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because someone with resources and motive made it happen. Do-Yun read the message twice. Then he looked toward the door where Mia and Sophie had just disappeared into the morning, Sophie's voice still faintly audible as she pointed out something exciting on the street. And he understood with complete and terrible clarity that whatever had happened 7 years ago was not an accident and was not over, and that the small girl with the familiar eyes was at the center of it. He opened his email. The first attachment was the death certificate. The second was a DNA testing request form, already filled out with Sophie's details. Jinseo had thought of everything. Do-Yun stared at the form for a long time. Then he picked up his pen. The DNA results took 72 hours. Do-Yun knew what they would say before the envelope arrived. He had known since the lobby, since Sophie had looked up at him with those eyes. His mother's eyes, the same slight downward pull at the outer corners that showed up in every Lee family photograph going back 3 generations. Genetics didn't lie. Genetics didn't forget. He opened the envelope standing at his desk, alone, door locked. 99.97% probability of paternity. He sat down slowly. Not because his legs gave way. Lee Do-Yun did not have the kind of legs that gave way, but because something needed to happen with the information, and sitting seemed like the only reasonable response to the fact that he had a daughter. That he had had a daughter for 8 years without knowing. That somewhere in this building, 1 floor below him, a little girl was doing her homework or eating her dinner or telling her mother about something exciting she had seen on the street, and she was his. He thought about the 7 years he had spent convinced he was the last of himself. He picked up his phone and called Jinseo. The results came, he said. I assumed, Jinseo said. The hospital file came through an hour ago. Do-Yun, I need you to stay calm when I tell you this. I'm calm. You won't be. Jinseo exhaled. She didn't die in a car accident. The accident was staged. She was admitted to Sunchunhyang Hospital under a false name 3 days after she supposedly died. Blunt force trauma to the head. She was unconscious for 11 days. When she stabilized, she was transferred. And this is where the file goes dark. The transfer paperwork lists an authorizing signature, but the doctor attached to that signature retired 6 months later and moved to New Zealand. The nurse on duty that night, a woman named Baek Soo-yeon, requested emergency leave the following week and never came back. Do-Yun's jaw tightened. Someone cleaned it. Very thoroughly, but not thoroughly enough. A pause. The authorizing signature on the transfer paperwork. I've seen it before. So have you. It's on every Lee Group document that's ever crossed your desk without your father's knowledge. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. Sung-jin, Do-Yun said. It wasn't a question. He went to her door that evening. He stood outside Unit 3B for longer than he would ever admit, the envelope in his hand, constructing and abandoning opening lines. He was a man who negotiated billion-won contracts without breaking a sweat. He had no language for this. He knocked. Sophie opened the door before Mia could get there, because Sophie, he was learning, treated doors as a personal challenge. It's the Rain Man, she announced over her shoulder. Mia appeared behind her, drying her hands on a kitchen towel, and when she saw him, her expression shifted through several things in quick succession. Surprise, wariness, something that might have been recognition if recognition were possible, which it wasn't, because she didn't know him. She had made that very clear without ever saying it directly. Mr. Lee, she said carefully. She had learned his name from the building directory he assumed, or from Sophie, who had no doubt conducted her own investigation. I need to speak with you, he said. It's important. She looked at him for a moment, really looked, the way she hadn't allowed herself to before, and something moved across her face that she quickly settled back into neutrality. Sophie, go finish your drawing. But... Sophie. Sophie retreated with theatrical reluctance, dragging her feet in a way that suggested she planned to listen from the hallway. Mia stepped back and let him in. The apartment was small and clean and smelled like jollof rice and something floral he couldn't name. There were Sophie's drawings everywhere, taped to walls, stacked on the counter, one half finished on the coffee table. Families, mostly. Always families, in varying configurations. He forced himself to look away from them. Mia stood across from him with her arms loosely folded, not defensive exactly, but prepared. She was wearing a simple gray top, hair tied back, and the ring was there on her finger, catching the warm light of the apartment, and he had to actively redirect his attention. He set the envelope on the table. She looked at it, then at him. What is this? A DNA test, he said. Sophie is my daughter. The silence was extraordinary. Mia's arms unfolded slowly. She looked at the envelope. She looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes. Not surprise, he noticed. Not quite. Something more complicated than surprise. You should sit down, he said quietly. I'm fine standing, she said, but her voice had changed. Thinner, like something pulled too tight. I'm not here to threaten you, he said. I'm not here to take anything from you. I need you to understand that before anything else, He stopped, started again. I need to know what you remember, about before, about how you got here. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was steady but careful, each word chosen. I remember waking up in a hospital. I don't know which one. Sophie was already born. I had fragments, a city, a feeling, a face I couldn't hold on to. I didn't know who I was for almost a year. I built everything else from nothing. And the ring? He asked. His voice came out quieter than intended. Her hand moved instinctively to it. Her fingers closed around it, not hiding it, protecting it. I woke up wearing it, she said. It's the only thing I had. I never took it off. He nodded slowly. He didn't trust himself to say anything else about the ring right now. I'm going to find out what happened to you, he said instead. I have someone working on it. There are hospital records, a nurse who disappeared, a paper trail that was meant to be invisible. He watched her face carefully. Someone did this to you deliberately. Someone who is still very much present in my life. Mia looked at him for a long moment, that same quality of looking, thorough, measuring, that he was beginning to recognize as distinctly hers. Then slowly, she sat down. Tell me, she said. And so he did. They sat across from each other at her small kitchen table, Sophie's drawings scattered between them, and he told her everything Jinseo had found. She listened without interrupting, which surprised him. She asked two precise, intelligent questions, which did not surprise him at all. At some point, Sophie materialized in the doorway with the specific casualness of a child who had definitely been listening, holding a drawing she pretended to have just finished. She climbed into the chair beside Do-yoon without asking permission and laid the drawing on the table between them. It was a picture of three people standing in the snow. That's you, Sophie told Do-yoon, pointing to the tallest figure. I gave you a blue coat because you look like a blue coat person. Mia closed her eyes briefly. Do-yoon looked at the drawing for a moment. Then, without planning to, he reached out and tucked a loose corner of the paper flat, and his hand brushed Mia's where it rested on the table. Neither of them moved for just a second too long. Then Mia quietly pulled her hand back, and Do-yoon cleared his throat, and Sophie looked between them with the knowing expression of someone who was 8 years old and understood absolutely everything. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent. But inside Unit 3B, something that had been frozen for 7 years shifted, just slightly, just enough. Park Jinseo, found Baek Suyeon on a Tuesday. She was living in Busan under her mother's maiden name, working at a small clinic 2 streets from the sea. She had cut her hair, changed her glasses, built a quiet life around the specific hope that no one would ever find her. Jinseo found her in 11 days, which he considered slow by his standards. He called Do-yun from the parking lot of the clinic. She's here, but she won't talk to me. She saw my face and locked the back office and called security. A pause. She's scared, genuinely scared. Whatever she saw 7 years ago, she's been running from it ever since. Do-yun was already reaching for his jacket. I'll come. That might make it worse. She knows the Lee name. Then I'm not going as a Lee. He thought for a moment. Tell her the woman survived. Tell her the woman's daughter is 8 years old and asking questions. Tell her that. Silence on the line. That's either going to work very well, Jinseo said, or she'll disappear before morning. Make the call. Baek Soo-yun agreed to meet the following afternoon at a tea house 3 streets from the clinic. She arrived 7 minutes late, sat with her back to the wall, and spent the first 2 minutes checking every exit. She was in her mid-40s, careful-eyed, with the particular exhaustion of someone who had been holding a secret so long it had become structural. Remove it, and she might simply collapse. Do-yun sat across from her and said nothing until she was ready. When she finally spoke, it came out like something that had been pressurized for years. I was the attending nurse the night she was transferred, she said. She was stable. She was recovering. Another week, and she would have been well enough to... It didn't matter. The order came through, and I was told to prepare her for transfer. Private facility, the paperwork said. Family authorization. Whose authorization? Do-yun asked. Soo-yun looked at her tea. The name on the form was a doctor I didn't recognize. But the man who came to oversee the transfer, I knew his face. Everyone in Seoul knew his face. She paused. He stood in the hallway and watched them wheel her out, and he looked at me and said, very quietly, "You were not here tonight." Just like that. And I knew exactly what kind of man says something like that and what happens to people who don't listen. Lee Sung-jin, Do-yun said. She flinched at the name like it had a physical edge. I requested leave the next morning. I never went back. I told myself she was probably fine, that it was just... I told myself a lot of things. Her voice dropped. Is she really alive? She's alive, Do-yun said. She's in Seoul. Soo-yun pressed her fingers to her mouth. Her eyes filled, but she didn't let it become anything more than that. She had the composure of someone who had trained herself out of falling apart. The child, she said. She was already pregnant when they transferred her. 4 months, approximately. I noted it in the chart. She looked up at Do-yun directly for the first time. I noted it in the chart that I wasn't supposed to have written. I made a copy. I've been keeping it for 7 years because I didn't know what else to do with it, and I was too afraid to do anything at all. Do-yun leaned forward. I need that copy. She opened her bag. He drove back to Seoul with the file on the passenger seat and Jinseo on speakerphone, and something cold and clarifying moving through him that he recognized as fury. Not the hot, reactive kind, but the deep, quiet kind that didn't burn out. The kind that built cases. He knew she was pregnant, Do-yun said. Yes, Jinseo said. He had her removed anyway. Yes. He wasn't just removing her. He was removing an heir. He let that sit for a moment. He's been planning this for years. Long before she disappeared, she was just the first step. Jinseo was quiet, then carefully. Then, Do-yun, I've been pulling the financial records you asked for last week. The asset movements, they're not new. They started 8 months ago. Shell companies, property transfers, 3 offshore accounts that trace back to a holding group registered under a name that doesn't exist. A pause waited with implication. He's not planning, he's executing. Do-yun's hands tightened on the wheel. How long do we have? If the pattern holds, 6 weeks, maybe 8. Then we have 4, Do-yun said. I don't wait for patterns. He went to Mia that evening. She opened the door before he knocked. She had heard the elevator, he realized, which meant she had learned the sound of his arrival, which meant something he decided not to examine right now. She was in a rust-colored wrap, hair loose, and she looked at his face and immediately stepped back to let him in. You found something, she said. I found the nurse. He told her everything. He watched her face as he laid it out. Sokwichao, Soo-yun's account, the transfer order, the pregnancy noted in a chart that was never supposed to exist. Mia sat very still throughout, hands folded on the table, and he had learned enough about her in the past 2 weeks to know that stillness was not passivity. Stillness, for Mia, was the outer surface of something churning very hard underneath. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "He knew I was pregnant," she said. "Yes. And he still—" She stopped. Her jaw tightened. "Sophie," she said quietly, not a question, an understanding, a mother recalculating every fear she had ever carried. "He doesn't know she exists," Do-yoon said. "Jinseo is certain. The birth was registered under the radar, the records buried well enough that even his reach didn't find them." He paused. "You protected her. Whatever happened, whatever choices you made, you protected her." Mia looked up at him. Her eyes were bright with something she was refusing to let become tears. Do-yoon. It was the first time she had used his name without the formal distance of Mr. Lee, and they both noticed it at the same time. A small thing. It landed anyway. "We're going to end this," he said. "I promise you that." She held his gaze for a moment, steady, searching, and something passed between them that was too specific to be nothing and too fragile to be named. Then she nodded once, and he saw in that nod not just agreement, but the particular courage of a woman who had been fighting alone for a very long time and had just, quietly, decided to let someone stand beside her. From the hallway came Sophie's voice, decisive and carrying. "Mama, Do-yoon stays for dinner. I already set his place." Mia closed her eyes briefly. Do-yoon looked down at the table to hide the fact that something in his expression had gone completely unguarded. "She planned this," Mia said. "I know," he said. "She's been planning it for days." "I know," he said again, and this time he didn't bother hiding the almost smile. Mia shook her head slowly, and despite everything, the file on the table, the fury still sitting cold in his chest, the 6 weeks Jinseo had given them, she smiled too. Small, reluctant, real. It was the first time he had seen her smile. He understood immediately that it was going to be a problem for him if he was going to walk away after everything. Do-yoon stayed for dinner. Sophie had made sure of that by setting his place with the good bowl, Mia's words, delivered with the exasperated fondness of a mother who had long since accepted that her daughter operated on her own sovereign logic. The good bowl was blue, chipped slightly at the rim, and Sophie had placed it at the head of the table with the gravity of someone conducting an official ceremony. He sat where Sophie pointed. He ate what Mia served. He listened to Sophie explain, at considerable length, the complex social landscape of her new school, the injustice of a homework policy she considered constitutionally unsound, and her current theory that the elderly man in Unit 5A was secretly a retired spy. "What's his evidence?" Do-yoon asked. "He has very good posture and he's always watching the street," Sophie said. "Also, he has 3 locks on his door. I counted." "That's either a spy or a man who values his privacy." "Same thing," Sophie said confidently. Mia was watching him from across the table with an expression he was beginning to collect. Quiet, unguarded, gone the moment she realized he'd caught it. Like she was assembling something in her mind and hadn't decided what to do with it yet. After dinner, Sophie disappeared to her room with minimal protest, which meant she had achieved her objective for the evening and considered further surveillance unnecessary. Do-yoon helped Mia clear the table without asking, moving around her small kitchen with a careful awareness of her space, handing her things before she reached for them in a way that felt instinctive, and then felt like too much, and then felt, when she accepted them without comment, like exactly enough. They stood at the sink together, the city quiet outside, and Mia washed and he dried, and neither of them spoke for a while in the specific comfortable way of people who have known each other across lifetimes. "You don't have to do all this," she said finally. "I know," he said. "The investigating, the file, coming here." She kept her eyes on the water. "You could handle this from a distance. Most men in your position would." "I'm not interested in distance," he said quietly. She was still for a moment. Then she handed him a glass to dry, and their fingers overlapped briefly on the stem, and she didn't pull away immediately this time. Just a second. Just enough for him to notice the warmth of her hand, and for her to notice that he noticed. She pulled away gently, and said nothing, and he dried the glass, and said nothing, and the kitchen felt very small in the best and most terrifying way. It was Jinseo who forced everything open. He called at 11 that night, after Do-yoon had gone home, after Mia had checked on Sophie twice, and sat at the kitchen table alone with a cup of tea she didn't drink. I need to tell you something, Jinseo said, and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. Do-yun, sitting at his desk in the dark, said, Go ahead. I went further back, past the hospital records, past the transfer. I pulled travel records, financial movement, communication logs. A pause. Do-yun, there are withdrawal records from an account registered to Mia Adeizi, not the dead woman's account, a different one, opened 14 months after she supposedly died. Accra, 2019. Lagos, 2020. The account was accessed regularly until 18 months ago when she moved to Seoul. Silence. She was managing money, Jinseo continued, measured and careful, deliberately, consistently, over several years. This is not a woman without memory. This is a woman who knew exactly who she was and made a series of very specific choices. Do-yun said nothing for a long time. She remembered, he said. At some point, yes, it appears so. He sat with that, turned it over, felt the edges of it, the sharpness, the complexity, the thing underneath the sharpness that was not quite anger and not quite hurt, and was perhaps both at once. Thank you, he said to Jinseo. Don't mention this to anyone else. He sat in the dark for a long time after that. He came the next morning before Sophie left for school. Sophie opened the door, assessed his expression with the accuracy of a child who had learned to read adult faces as a survival skill, and said simply, Mama is in the kitchen, and stepped aside. Mia was standing at the counter with her back to the door, and she knew from the quality of the silence who had come in. She turned slowly. She looked at his face, and whatever she saw there made her set down her cup very carefully, like she was buying herself one more moment of the world as it currently was. You know, she said, not a question. Yes, he said. Sophie appeared in the doorway with her school bag, looked between them, and made the rare and gracious decision to be somewhere else. I'll wait downstairs, she announced, and was gone before either of them could respond. The apartment felt very still. Tell me, Do-yun said. His voice was quiet, controlled, but she could hear what it was costing him. Tell me yourself, not Jinseo's version, yours. Mia looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where they had spread evidence files and eaten dinner, and slowly, carefully, begun to trust each other. And she told him the truth. The memories started coming back 3 months after the attack, she said. Not all at once, in pieces. Your face first, then the ring, then Sung-jin, his voice in that hospital corridor, what he said to the nurse. I remembered everything within 6 months. She paused. I was already 5 months pregnant by then. Do-yun stood very still. I knew what your family was, she continued, her voice steady but her hands folded tight on the table. I had just watched your uncle have me beaten and erased like I was nothing, and I was carrying a child, your child, and I knew that if I came back, if I walked back into that world, Sung-jin would know about her. He would see her as exactly what she was, a threat to everything he was building. She looked up at Do-yun directly. I couldn't protect you from him. I didn't have that kind of power, but I could protect her. I could disappear so completely that he would never think to look. The silence was long and heavy and full. You let me believe you were dead, Do-yun said, low, careful. Yes. 7 years. Yes. Her voice cracked slightly on the word, and she steadied it. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I understand if you can't, but I need you to know that there was not a single day, not one, that I didn't think about you. Not one day that it didn't cost me something I couldn't get back. Do-yun crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and sat down across from her and leaned forward with his elbows on the table and looked at her. Really looked, the way he hadn't allowed himself to since the night in the rain. And she held his gaze and didn't flinch. You chose her, he said finally, over everything, over yourself, over me. Yes, she whispered. He was quiet for a very long moment. Then slowly, he reached across the table and covered her folded hands with one of his, not pulling, not holding, just there, solid and deliberate and unutterably gentle. Then I understand, he said. Her breath caught. I don't like it, he added, and the honesty of it, the raw, uncalculated honesty, made her eyes fill finally with what she had been refusing since he walked in. I won't pretend it doesn't sit in me like something broken, but I understand it. And Mia, he waited until she looked at him. Sophie is extraordinary. Whatever it cost, she is extraordinary. You did that. Mia pressed her free hand over her mouth. Outside, distantly, Seoul went about its morning, indifferent and alive. Inside, something that had been broken for 7 years didn't fix itself. That wasn't how broken. Things worked, but it shifted toward each other, tentatively, the way two halves will when they finally remember they were once whole. And downstairs, Sophie sat on the lobby bench, swinging her feet, smiling at nothing in particular, absolutely certain that everything was going to be fine. Do-yeon gave himself 1 week. 1 week to build the case so airtight that Sung-jin would have no room to maneuver, no favor to call in, no name powerful enough to save him. Jin-seo worked without sleeping. Do-yeon worked the same way. The evidence assembled itself with the grim momentum of a thing that had always been true and was finally being allowed to exist. Soo-yeon's testimony, the forged transfer documents, the financial trail connecting 3 shell companies back to Sung-jin's private accounts, the original hospital chart with Mia's pregnancy noted in handwriting that matched Soo-yeon's and couldn't be disputed. They added Mia's account. Formal, detailed, devastating. They added 7 years of careful documentation that Mia had kept across 3 countries. Dates, incidents, 2 near encounters she had never told anyone about. A photograph she had taken in Lagos in 2021 of a man she recognized as one of Sung-jin's associates standing outside her building. She had been running a quiet, solitary investigation of her own for years. She had simply had no one safe enough to hand it to. When Do-yeon looked at the full file, their 2 halves combined, he understood that together they had built something that would hold. He called his lawyer on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, Lee Sung-jin had been formally arrested. Do-yeon made sure he was there, not at the police station, that he left to the authorities, to the lawyers, to the machinery of consequence, finally doing what it was designed to do. He was there at the Lee Group boardroom, where Sung-jin was brought briefly to sign emergency documents before his lawyers could construct a delay. It was Do-yeon who had arranged that specific detail, quietly, precisely, because he had not built a company on rational thinking without understanding that some moments needed to be witnessed in person. Sung-jin walked in, looking like a man who still believed the situation was recoverable. He straightened his cuffs. He looked at Do-yeon across the long boardroom table with the particular expression of a man who had always privately considered himself the smarter one. "You're making a mistake," Sung-jin said, calm, almost paternal. "You don't understand the full picture." "I understand all of it," Do-yeon said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I understand that you had a pregnant woman beaten and transferred to a facility she was never meant to leave. I understand that you forged her death certificate, erased her records, and paid 3 people to stay quiet, 2 of whom are currently giving statements." He took 1 step forward. "I understand that you have been systematically dismantling my inheritance for 8 years while sitting at my family's dinner table and smiling." Sung-jin's composure shifted slightly. Not much. Enough. "You have always been soft," he said. "Your father was the same. Sentiment dressed up as principle." "No," Do-yeon said quietly. "My father was soft. I am not." He let that land. "I want you to hear me very clearly right now, because I will say this once and once only. The legal case will proceed without my interference. I don't need to touch it. The evidence speaks without my help. But if you ever come near Mia or Sophie again, if you send anyone near them, if I find so much as your shadow in the same direction as my family—" He paused, and something moved across his face that was not rage, but was far more dangerous than rage. It was certainty. "I will not use lawyers. I will not use courts. I will use every resource I have built over 15 years, and I will dismantle everything you have left with methods that are significantly less legal and significantly less merciful. Are we clear?" The room was very quiet. Sung-jin looked at him for a long moment. The composure was still there, technically, but something behind it had gone out. Some fundamental assumption about who held the power in this family had quietly, permanently collapsed. He said nothing. The officers moved forward. Do-yeon stepped back and watched his uncle be led from the room and felt not triumph. Triumph was too light a word, too celebratory for something this heavy, but a deep, settling finality, like a door closing on a room he never had to enter again. He straightened his jacket. He picked up his phone. He called Mia. "It's done," he said. On the other end of the line, he heard her exhale. Long, slow, the specific release of a breath held across 7 years, and that sound undid him more completely than anything else that day. If this story has kept you with us this far, we'd love to know, would you have made the same choice Mia did? Tell us in the comments below, and if you haven't already, please subscribe and share the story with someone who needs a reminder that truth always finds its way home. The snow came 3 weeks later. Sophie saw it first, naturally, pressing her face to the window at 7 in the morning with a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy that brought Mia from the kitchen and Do-Yun, who had arrived early, who had been arriving early with increasing regularity, who Sophie had simply begun listing as a household fixture, from the doorway. "Snow," Sophie announced, as though she had personally arranged it. They took her to the park. This was non-negotiable once Sophie had located her coat, her gloves, her hat, and a second hat she insisted Do-Yun wear because he hadn't brought one, and she considered this irresponsible. He wore the hat without complaint. It was pale yellow and slightly too small, and Mia looked at him wearing it, and pressed her lips together firmly, and looked away. Sophie ran ahead, immediately locating the best patch of untouched snow with the precision of a child who had been waiting her whole life for exactly this. Her laughter carried back to them in the cold air, bright and unself-conscious. Do-Yun, and Mia walked behind her, close enough that their arms occasionally brushed. "She's going to be completely insufferable about this," Mia said. "She'll want snow every day now. She'll consider this a precedent." "She's not wrong that it's better with snow," he said. Mia smiled at the ground. He watched it happen, the way it started reluctant and then gave itself over, and felt the warmth of it move through him in the middle of all that cold. "Mia," he said. She looked up. He stopped walking. She stopped with him. Sophie was a bright figure in yellow ahead of them, spinning with her arms out, oblivious or pretending to be. With Sophie, both were equally possible. Do-Yun reached out and tucked a strand of hair back from her face where the wind had pulled it loose. His hand stayed at her jaw for a moment, gentle, asking, and she looked at him with those eyes that had found him in the dark 7 years ago and found him again in the rain and had been slowly, carefully, choosing him ever since. She leaned in first, just slightly, just enough. He closed the distance. It was quiet and unhurried and tasted like cold air and something long overdue. Her hand came up to rest lightly against his chest, not pushing, just resting, feeling his heartbeat. And he kept his touch soft, because she had been through enough hard things, and he intended, from this point forward, to be something different. They pulled back gently. Her eyes were bright. His expression was the most unguarded it had been in 7 years, open in a way he had forgotten was possible. From ahead of them, Sophie's voice rang out, deliberately casual. "I'm not looking, by the way." Mia laughed, a real laugh, full and warm and completely unguarded, and Do-Yun thought that sound was something he could spend a very long time trying to deserve. He took her hand. They walked towards Sophie through the snow, the three of them together in the white quiet of the morning. And nothing was perfect, and everything was broken in places, and healing in others, and the future was uncertain in the specific hopeful way that only futures built from truth ever are. It was, all things considered, exactly enough. And that is where we leave them, not at a perfect ending, but at a real one. Which one do you think was the bravest? Do-Yun, Mia, or Sophie? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. If this story moved you, share it with someone today, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. We'll see you in the next one.